The evening sun cast a warm glow across the quiet town of Willow's End, where children played in the street and old Mr. Jenkins tended to his garden. In the heart of the town square, a young girl named Lily sat on a bench, her eyes glued to the worn pages of a book. She was lost in the whimsical tales it told, oblivious to the world around her. The bell at the nearby church tolled 7, echoing through the streets. It was a comforting sound, a promise of dinner and bedtime stories for the town's residents. But as the final chime faded, an eerie silence fell over Willow's End, leaving only the distant murmur of a cooling summer breeze. Lily looked up, her eyes widening as she realized that she was the only one left in the square. The children had disappeared, Mr. Jenkins' garden tools lay abandoned, and the playful laughter had been replaced by an unsettling stillness. A chill crept up her spine as she noticed that the shadows had grown longer, darker. They stretched out from the alleyways like fingers reaching for her. Her heart raced as she hurriedly gathered her belongings, eager to get home. But something wasn't right. The building she knew so well now looked distorted, as if viewed through a shattered pane of glass. The once familiar streets twisted and turned into unrecognizable pathways that seemed to lead nowhere. The air grew colder, carrying with it an unexplained scent of decay. The hairs on the back of Lily's neck stood on end. The town she had known her entire life was transforming before her eyes. What once was a bastion of comfort had turned into a labyrinth of dread. As she took a tentative step forward, the cobblestone beneath her feet cracked and shifted, the ground groaning as if alive with malevolent intent. Her eyes darted from one eerie shadow to the next, searching for any sign of her friends or neighbors. But all she found was a world that seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. The silence was broken by the distant sound of a child's laughter, faint and eerie. It seemed to be coming from all around her, bouncing off the crooked buildings and dancing in the air. The chuckles grew closer, yet the town remained as empty as ever. Lily's heart thudded in her chest, each beat echoing in the deserted streets. She clutched her book tightly, feeling a strange power emanate from it, as if it was a beacon of light in the gathering gloom. The laughter grew louder, more taunting, and she realized it was leading her deeper into the twisted maze of streets. A flicker of movement in the corner of her eye made her turn, and she saw it, a shadow, detached from any source, slithering through the alleyways. It paused and grew still, as if it had noticed her. Lily's breath caught in her throat. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to move, her eyes glued to the shadowy figure that seemed to mimic her movements. It grew more defined, taking the shape of a little girl, similar in age to herself, yet there was something unmistakably sinister in the way it moved. Her heart racing, Lily broke into a run. The shadowy girl kept pace, always just out of reach. The buildings grew taller, leaning in as if to swallow her whole. The cobblestone streets grew slick with an unseen substance, and she stumbled, dropping her book. As she reached out to grab it, a hand, cold and unyielding, wrapped around her wrist. She screamed, her voice piercing the silence, and yanked her hand away. The shadow girl grinned, her teeth sharp and pointed. Lily's eyes fell upon her book, laying open on the ground, pages fluttering in the breeze. In that moment, she knew that she had to follow the story's trail, for it was the only hope she had of finding her way home. With a deep breath, she picked it up and continued her frantic dash through the transformed town, the shadow at her heels, the only sound the pounding of her feet, and the pages turning in her trembling grip. The laughter grew more distinct, coming from the town square she had just left. The square looked different now, the benches and trees replaced by looming monoliths that stretched into a sky that was now a deep, unnatural purple. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone, and a low buzzing filled her ears. Lily stumbled through the twisted landscape, her eyes darting from the shadow girl to the path ahead. The ground grew uneven, littered with cracks that opened into darkness, beckoning her to fall in. She could feel the pull, the desperate need to let go of reality and fall into the abyss, but she resisted. The book grew warm in her hand, a beacon of hope in the suffocating dread. The square opened up before her, and in the center stood a figure, tall and cloaked in shadow. It held a hand out to her, the same hand that had been laughing so gleefully. The shadow girl stopped, her grin fading into a look of hunger. The figure spoke, its voice a chilling whisper that seemed to come from the very air around her. "You found me, little Lily," it said. "Welcome to my story." Lily clutched her book closer, her eyes fixed on the outstretched hand. It was her only way back, but something told her that the price was too high. Her mind raced, her thoughts a tangle of fear and desperation. The figure grew closer, the shadows around it swirling like a living thing. She had to act fast. Summoning all her courage, Lily opened her book to a random page and began to read aloud. The words flowed from her lips in a language she had never spoken before, yet she understood each syllable. The shadows retreated, hissing and snarling, and the figure took a step back. The ground beneath her solidified, the buildings straightening as the world around her started to right itself. The laughter grew fainter, and the shadows receded. The town of Willow's End began to look more like its former self. With trembling hands, Lily continued to read, each word a battle cry against the encroaching darkness. The figure's grip on the square weakened, and she knew she had a chance. With one final push of will, She slammed the book shut, and the world was bathed in light. The figure dissipated into the air, leaving behind only the lingering scent of decay and a sense of malevolence that seemed to cling to her very soul. Lily stood in the now empty town square, her heart hammering in her chest. The shadows had retreated, but she knew they were not gone for good. The book's power was strong, but she had seen the darkness that lurked in the pages. She had glimpsed the true face of the creature that had claimed her town, and it was not a tale she would soon forget. The story had only just begun. Her house was just around the corner, but the path was still treacherous. The cobblestone was still slick with the shadow's residue, and she had to tread carefully. As she approached her home, the windows looked at her like unblinking eyes, the curtains drawn tight. She reached for the door handle, cold to the touch. Turning it slowly, she pushed the door open, expecting the worst. The house was silent, the only light coming from the flickering candles her mother had lit before she had left. The warmth of the fireplace was a stark contrast to the chill outside, but the comfort it usually brought now felt alien. The walls whispered with secrets she did not want to know. Her mother's rocking chair sat in the corner, gently swaying back and forth, though there was no breeze to push it. Lily stepped into the living room, her eyes searching for any sign of life. "Mom?" she called out, her voice cracking. There was no answer. The chair continued to rock, the shadows it cast dancing across the floor like a silent pendulum counting the moments of her fear. She took another step forward, her breath hitching in her throat as she noticed something peculiar. The bookshelf, once full of her favorite tales, was now bare except for one solitary book, the same one she had been reading in the square. Its pages fluttered as if inviting her to continue the story. The house felt alive, the walls pulsing with a rhythm that matched her racing heart. She approached the bookshelf, the floorboards creaking beneath her weight. As she reached for the book, she felt a sudden warmth, a sense of protection that seemed to emanate from its very spine. It was her mother's favorite story, one she had read to Lily countless times before bed. The tale of Willow's End, the title read in gold letters. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, recounting the legend of the town's founder who had sealed away the shadows that had once threatened Thand. The story had always felt like a fairy tale, a distant memory from another time, but now it was all too real. With newfound determination, Lily opened the book once more, the pages seemingly drawing her in. The words grew clearer, the language now familiar as if it was her own mother speaking directly to her. The story unfolded, revealing a hidden chapter that spoke of a girl who had the power to fight the shadows. Her eyes widened as she read about her own lineage, a line of guardians that stretched back to the town's creation. It was her destiny to stand against the darkness, to protect the people she loved. Her mother had known all along, had been preparing her without saying a word. Lily felt a rush of love and sorrow, knowing she could never share this burden with her. But she also felt a sense of pride, a fierce determination to continue the legacy that had been passed down to her. She read on, her eyes scanning the pages for any clue on how to banish the shadows that had claimed her to Cleon. The house grew colder, the shadows at the edges of her vision growing bolder, but she knew she had the power to stop them. The story was her map, her weapon, and she was ready to face the nightmare. The air grew thick again, the shadows gathering in the corners of the room, ready to strike. But Lily was no longer afraid. The words of the tale fueled her spirit, giving her the strength to stand tall. The book began to glow, the light from its pages pushing back the darkness. She could feel the power within her, a burning fire that grew with every syllable she spoke. The shadows hissed and writhed as she recited the ancient incantations, their power diminishing with each passing second. The house trembled as the battle raged on, the shadows trying to reclaim their foothold. But Lily held firm, her voice unwavering as she read from the book. The light grew brighter, filling the room, and she felt a surge of energy course through her veins. With a final, triumphant cry, she slammed the book shut, and the shadows vanished, leaving her standing in the warm embrace of her home. The house, once a prison of fear, now felt like a sanctuary. The battle had only just begun, but she had taken the first step. The town of Willow's End was in her hands, and she would not let it fall. As she made her way through the familiar corridors, the walls spoke to her in whispers of encouragement. She could feel the town's history seep into her bones, the legacy of guardians before her guiding her every move. Her mother's room was next, and she steeled herself for what she might find. The door was ajar, the candle on her nightstand still flickering. The rocking chair was still, but the bed was untouched, as if her mother had never returned. In the quiet of the night, Lily knew she could not rest. The shadows would return, and she had to be ready. She gathered her courage and set out into the streets once more, the book in hand, her shield against the darkness. The town had returned to its natural state, the buildings no longer twisted reflections of themselves. But she knew the shadows were waiting, biding their time, watching from the corners of her eyes. The moon cast a pale glow over Willow's End, turning the cobblestone streets into a dance floor for the shadows that lurked. She walked with purpose, the book's whispers in her ear. It guided her to the outskirts of town, where the ancient oak tree stood sentinel, its gnarled roots reaching deep into the earth. It was here that she would find the source of the shadow's power. The tree pulsed with a sickly energy, the very air around it humming with malice. Lily approached the tree, her heart thundering in her chest. The bark was etched with the same symbols she had seen in the book, symbols of power and protection. With a deep breath, she began to etch her own mark, drawing on the strength of her ancestors. The tree groaned in protest, the shadows around her hissing in anger. But she was the guardian now, and she would not be deterred. The moment the final symbol was complete, a blast of light erupted from the tree, sending the shadows scurrying away like cockroaches from the sun. The town was safe for now, but she knew the fight was far from over. The creature that had taunted her was not destroyed, only driven back. She had to find the source of its power, the very pages that had spawned it. With the dawn approaching, she made her way back to the town square, her mind racing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The book was silent in her grasp, as if it knew she had only begun to unravel its mysteries. The square was empty once more, the shadows retreating with the coming of light, but she could feel the darkness lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the night to fall once again. Lily took her place on the bench where her adventure had begun, the warmth of the rising sun a comfort against the chill of the night. As she opened the book to the first page, she knew that she had to continue the story, to find the true ending and free her town from the shadow's grip. The pages fluttered open, and she read aloud, her voice strong and clear. Each word was a declaration of war, each syllable a promise to restore the peace her mother had worked so tirelessly to maintain. The story grew darker, more complex, but she would not falter. Willow's End was her home, and she was its guardian. The sun continued to rise, casting a soft glow over the pages. As she read, the world around her started to shift again, the lines between reality and the story blurring. She was not just a girl in a town, she was a character in a tale that had been unfolding for centuries, and she was about to face the greatest challenge the story had ever seen. The shadow girl emerged from the pages, her grin more malicious than before. The square was their battleground, and the fate of the town hung in the balance. Lily stood, her eyes never leaving the creature that had taken the form of her own nightmare. The incantations from the book flowed from her lips, each one a weapon in the war against the dark. Their fight was fierce, a dance of light and shadow, the book's power clashing with the creature's malice. The ground trembled with each blow they exchanged, the air charged with the tension of 1,000 untold stories. And as the sun reached its zenith, Lily felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. The incantation she needed was right there, hidden in the book's last pages, written in the faded ink of forgotten lullabies and bedtime tales. With a roar that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality, she unleashed the final verse. The shadow girl wailed, her form flickering and distorting as she tried to resist the power of the words. The air grew thick with the scent of burning parchment, and the light from the book grew so intense it was almost blinding. The creature stumbled, her laughter turning into a desperate screech. And with a final push, Lily sent her back into the pages from which she had come. The world snapped back into place with a thunderous crack. The square once again bathed in the mundane light of day. People began to filter into the streets, looking around with bewildered expressions, as if waking from a collective nightmare. Lily's mother was there, her eyes wide with fear and hope. They embraced, the warmth of their hug banishing the last lingering shivers of the night. But Lily knew that the battle was far from over. The book was still with her, the shadow still whispered, and the town still needed its guardian. Together, they set to work, searching for any signs of the creature's lingering influence. They found pages torn from the book scattered throughout the town, each one a potential doorway for the shadows to return. With trembling hands, Lily began the painstaking process of repairing the barriers her mother had put in place. The book spoke to her, guiding her through ancient rites and spells that had been passed down through generations of guardians. Days turned into weeks, and the town of Willow's End slowly began to heal. The laughter of children filled the streets once more. Mr. Jenkins tended his garden, and the church bell tolled with the steadfastness of the sunrise. Yet Lily remained vigilant, her eyes always searching the shadows, her ears pricked for the faintest whisper of the dark. She knew that the creature was still out there, lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. But she was ready. The book had become a part of her, its pages a map of her soul and her town's history. It was her duty to protect the people she loved, to keep the shadows at bay. And as she sat in the square each night, the warm glow of the book in her lap, she read the stories that had been written before, learning from the guardians who had come before her. The townsfolk grew to accept the quiet vigil she kept, the light from her book a beacon in the heart of Willow's End. They knew she was their protector, the keeper of the story that held back the night. And though the darkness would always be there, lurking just out of sight, they slept easier knowing that Lily was there, ready to fight. The story was ongoing, the pages of fate still being written. But she was the guardian, and she would not let the shadows win.